Hello everybody, thank you for joining today for the Policy Board meeting. We have the announcements, which you've probably heard so many times before you could guess what I'm going to say, but I will say them anyway. Well, I thought we could do, I won't, is it like a, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? A, B, C, D, phone a friend. Right, emergency evacuation procedures. In the case of a fire, a bell will ring continuously. If this occurs, please leave the building immediately following the green fire exit signs out to the assembly point, which is by the War Memorial on Duke Street. If anyone requires assistance, please let me know. Lifts should not be used. Please remain at the assembly point and do not attempt to return into the building until you have been advised that it is safe to do so. Facilities. The toilets are situated on the landing at the top of the main staircase and on the ground floor in the customer service centre. Filming of this meeting. Anyone attending this meeting is entitled to film it, but I should point out that only the councillors, officers and anyone sitting around these tables may be filmed. Members of the public should not be filmed, so please ensure that cameras are only pointed in this direction. When speaking, may I please remind you to ensure that you turn on your microphone and to speak into it. A red light will appear on the middle button to indicate that your microphone is switched on. When finished speaking, please remember to turn your microphone off again. So, announcements over. Dan, apologies for absence.
Thank you. I've had apologies from Councillors Paul Clark and Councillor Whitehead, and Councillor Chambers is subbing for Councillor Whitehead. Thank you.
Chair, is the meeting being broadcast?
It is, sorry, yes. So we can watch it back again. So, declarations of interest. Have you had any declarations of interest coming through? All members are reminded that they must disclose any interest they know they have in items of business on the meeting's agenda, and that they must do so at the point on the agenda or as soon as they become aware of the interest. If the interest is a disclosable pecuniary interest, they are also obliged to notify the monitoring officer within 28 days of the meeting. So we have the minutes of the last meeting, which I believe everybody has on their desk, or is that just me that's lucky?
Just you.
Oh, I get the VIP. Have you all had sight of the minutes of the meeting from the 29th of June, and are there any corrections or amendments that we would like to make? No? Fabulous.
Can you just sign them, please?
I will sign it, indeed. Anywhere in particular, or just somewhere?
Just there.
That makes sense. Sorry, of course. Sorry, I will feel like I'll be crooning into the microphone soon. Thank you, Dan. So we have two items on the agenda today, the Norwich to Tilbury Powerline proposals and the consultation on national planning reforms. Before we go into those items, I would like to invite the two public questions that we've got noted in the hope that we will be able to address them throughout the items that are on the agenda. If they are able to be answered directly, then we'll be able to do that. So we have the first item, well, the first public question from a Jackie Birch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Chelmsford City Council delayed the revision of the local plan to late 2023 or early 2024 to understand with greater clarity the review to the National Planning Policy Framework. Now that the draft consultation proposals are before you, can you say now whether it would be best for Chelmsford residents to continue with the revision already in chain and to submit it before June 2025, or wait until the new rules are enacted and start again? I cannot see also from the document or your proposed response what effect the new process would have on both made and upcoming neighbourhood plans, and what action do the various town and parish councils need to be taking in order to keep up with the changes proposed. Thank you.
Do you feel that you'd be able to answer that in your...
Best that
Yes.
the agenda item.
That's fine, of course. And then we have a second public question from Councillor John Burrow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Not so much a question, really, a contribution to the debate on item 5, Norwich to Tilby power line. I'm here to speak as a parish councillor for Little Waltham. Little Waltham is the village and the community probably which is most heavily affected by the power line as it sweeps round to the west of Chelmsford. Residents are angry, they're anxious, and they're uncertain about what's happening, and their search for an alternative solution to how the line should pass their village is extremely important to them, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to bring it up with the policy board. I'm going to focus on just one aspect of it, and that is, what do we want from this consultation exercise? There are three things. The first thing we definitely want is a full and fair impact assessment demonstrating exactly what the impact of this pylon line will have on our village, and I think I can speak for Great Waltham as well, on the Great Waltham village. I know that the Chelmsford City Council is seeking an impact assessment. We differ slightly, though, at this point, because Chelmsford is seeking the National Grid to produce an impact assessment. There's a problem with this because they did exactly the same thing last year when you responded to the first non-statutory consultation process. You asked very clearly for an impact assessment from the National Grid. The result, the National Grid just completely ignored Chelmsford City Council. No impact assessment has been produced. As far as I'm aware, none has even been begun. And the National Grid are just stonewalling the whole thing. So what we are saying and asking of the City Council is that this impact assessment should be done by the City Council itself. And the reason for that is several. They have better access to the appropriate information. They're more reliable. We can be sure of getting an impact assessment. It will be an independent impact assessment, independent of the National Grid, and I'm sure it would be reliable and fair. We believe that this impact assessment needs to be begun quickly now, as time is getting on, and we ask and hope that the city will feel able to produce such an assessment, because if we have to wait for the National Grid to be doing it, we may still be waiting as the pylons are finished in 5 years' time. So that's the first point that the village would wish me to make. Secondly, we want to make it clear that our first preference for an alternative solution is undergrounding the lines as they pass the village. Undergrounding is expensive, we recognise that, but the distance is short, probably not much more than a single kilometre, and it gives by far the best results, complete reinstatement of agricultural land and the continued use of it as for growing crops and such like. It will avoid all heritage and residence impacts on Great and Little Waltham, and could also, incidentally, resolve the difficulties with Broomfield Hospital and their helicopter and electronic difficulties.
Councillor Burrow.
My final point, just for 10 seconds. We ask also for the council to consider the alternative route suggested by the National Grid in their June 2023 document. They put forward an alternative route passing around Great Waltham, Howe Street, Pleshy and Broomfield. It's an excellent route. It just goes over uninhabited agricultural land. It deserves our support. They are resisting it at the moment because it's just 2 kilometres longer than the existing line. So we ask for the support of the council for that alternative route. Madam Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Burrow. Is it likely we could probably answer that through the course? Lovely. Thank you both for your questions. Officers have noted them and will make sure that they address them in their presentations as we go through for the rest of the meeting. So without any further ado, if we could move to the first main item on the agenda, the Norwich to Tilbury power line proposals. So responses to second non-statutory consultation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, Board. So agenda item 5 is, as stated, is the proposals for power line reinforcement across East Anglia. And the purpose of the report before you is to seek approval for consultation responses that are set out in the appendix to the report. And as you are aware now, this is the second non-statutory consultation on these proposals. For the keen-sighted, you'll see that the name of the proposal has changed. It's now called the Norwich to Tilbury power line proposals. Initially, on the first consultation, it was called East Anglia Green, but essentially it's the same proposals for National Grid reinforcements that essentially will go across, as I said, from Norwich to Tilbury. Now, I'm not going to be repeating everything that was originally said in the first consultation, and you've got links in the report to that, and our responses as well. Rather than labouring that point, I think it's probably easier for me just to focus on the changes that have come forward through this second stage of consultation. So just a quick recap. It's a new 183-kilometre power line, transmission line, starting, as I said, at a substation in Norwich, working its way through Norfolk, Suffolk, coming into Essex, through the Dedham Vale, and you'll see there that in tendering, it's sort of there's a new substation proposed as well on the Tendring Peninsula near Manningtree. And that's there for potential future connections to wind farms off the Essex and Suffolk coast. Sorry, apologies, an acronym there. Overhead line with conductors and steel lattice pylons are the vast majority of the route. There is some undergrounding, and that is where the route goes through the area of outstanding natural beauty, which is the Dedham Vale. So there is proposals for undergrounding through there. And as part of this consultation, this second non-statutory consultation, they have extended or proposed to extend some of that undergrounding to an area beyond the area of outstanding natural beauty, because it has an impact upon the area of outstanding natural beauty. So that's near Great Hawksley to the north of Colchester. Just a reminder, these proposals are considered nationally significant infrastructure proposals. So this application for this entire route is a planning application that is being submitted directly to the planning inspectorate through what's called a development consent order. So it is a planning application. It's a planning application that deals, as I said, with nationally strategic important infrastructure. And each one of those authorities that you see sort of highlighted there, and I think actually there's more than that. I think Baber, Tendring and Colchester seem to be lumped together all in one colour there, but all of those are host local authorities. So we have, along with ourselves, of course, we have a status within that process, within that development consent order process. So moving on, to get to the thing that's really important is for us tonight is how that preferred alignment is threading through Chelmsford, or going right the way through essentially from north to south of our administrative area. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see a map, and I'm not sure, hopefully you'll be able to see it hopefully fairly clearly on here, but apologies if that's a bit washed out. But on the left-hand side, there's the corridor that was originally consulted on last year, in the summer of last year, and that was the consultation corridor. And then on the right-hand side is now this latest consultation that actually fixes the alignment of the proposals. And what you'll see is that, broadly speaking, it follows within that consultation corridor, apart from two very small areas that I can point out later. So comes in close to Great Leys, comes down parallel to the A131, crosses near Sheepcote's roundabout, and then threads through a very narrow gap between the Walthams, which I come on to again later on, and then goes round the northwest of Chelmsford, around Writtle and close to the west of Writtle settlement, and I'll pick up some of the issues there as well, and then threads its way through some ancient woodland down south and exits our administrative area to go into Brentwood and Basildon's area. So the mapping that accompanies the consultation, there is an interactive map, and there is a link in the committee report to that, so you can actually see the detail, and you can actually see where the pylons are proposed to actually be placed. So actually the three areas that are outside, or two areas that were outside of that original consultation corridor, there's a very small area to the west of Writtle where it just comes out of that consultation corridor for probably about 100, 200 metres. But probably the bigger one is to the east of Ingatestone, where the route comes out of that corridor, comes back into Chelmsford's area, and I've got a slide later on, and it's appended in your committee reports as well. So they were the main changes that were proposed following this second, as I said, non-statutory consultation. So one of the things that I think was important and has been touched upon by Councillor Burrows from Little Waltham Parish Council is an alternative route. So within the documents that were published as part of this consultation, there were a number of suggestions how the National Grid have tested some of the proposals and some of the issues that have been highlighted to them from us, from the City Council, and from many other stakeholders. And on here, although I'm afraid that probably isn't the greatest of maps, but if you can see the kind of yellow area in the middle there, that is Great Waltham. You can see then there's a slight gap, and then that is Little Waltham. And that yellow area is a conservation area, and the yellow area in Little Waltham is a conservation area. So hopefully you can see, or you can hopefully just make out, that there is a very narrow gap in between the Walthams that the corridor is trying to thread these power lines through. We made representations, as I said, alongside many other bodies and individuals, saying that actually is an issue because there are many heritage assets in both of the villages. They're both conservation areas. There's a registered park and garden, there's Langley's house. It's a Grade 1 listed building. There's an ancient monument within that corridor as well, within that gap. And there are many significant heritage assessments that need to be fully assessed before you can make a judgment as to whether that is the correct route. And as Councillor Burrows rightly pointed out, this council made those representations, and to date, we haven't yet seen the full assessment of that heritage and archaeological and landscape impact that is going to have quite a significant impact upon that gap. Now, National Grid's response to that in this regard was to, you can see the blue line, was to look at an alternative route that routed between Great Waltham, sort of northwest, in between Great Waltham and Pleshy, and came back round to the northwest of Chelmsford. They discounted that primarily because of the length of the route. I think it adds between 2 to 3 kilometres to the route. And of course, that means more power lines and more pylons the longer the route is. Our position at the moment is that we wouldn't necessarily want to jump and say that this is our preferred option, because what has to happen first is that the heritage needs to be assessed, because there will be significant heritage impact on this route as well. Pleshy being a particularly important settlement with numerous heritage and archaeological interest, which no doubt members are aware of. So we just need to be sure whatever the proposal or whatever route that we put forwards or suggest doesn't necessarily just create more problems elsewhere, because that impact hasn't been assessed. So I think, and you'll see that through our consultation responses, is that the primary thing that, or output that we need from National Grid is the heritage and landscape assessments, impact assessments done, and then for us to assess those to determine what the appropriate route should be, and also what the appropriate mitigation should be. Because again, undergrounding is potentially an option, but undergrounding has significant disruptive consequences as well, particularly to underground archaeology. So we have to be careful that we're not jumping to a solution when we don't necessarily know what the impact is first. So I suppose in answer to Councillor Burrows, and I think this is probably the point to say that we wouldn't want to be in a situation where, and we can't, it isn't our proposals, it's National Grid's proposals, it isn't the City Council's proposals. So we wouldn't be undertaking a full heritage impact assessment of the route. It's for National Grid to do that, and for us to assess those, and where they are deficient or where they need to be improved, then it's for our officers to feed back to National Grid rather than undertake the assessments ourselves. I've also mentioned about undergrounding, and undergrounding is an option, but needs to be fully considered because of the consequential impact of undergrounding. And also, at each end of an undergrounding route, there's a requirement for a cable sealing plant, which is like a small substation where the overhead power lines stop. They then go down into a compound with equipment, and then they're undergrounded, and likewise where they come back up, the same cable sealing plant is required. So again, it's making sure that whatever proposal we put forwards, we don't create something that actually could be as harmful or just as harmful in another location, and until we can get that full assessment, we can't make that call. I'm going to just move on and to the consultation responses. So first of all, we've sort of jumped into the detail of the route, but we, officers and the board, agreed a response that last time that effectively said that we do support the transition to a low or zero carbon economy to address climate change and improve sustainability, where those schemes are appropriately located and suitably mitigated. But what we are still in a position where we aren't completely clear from the National Grid proposals whether those reinforcements are actually needed by 2030. And we need to have further evidence from National Grid to allow us to make that decision. And at this point, we're not in a position to be able to definitively say that we feel the need is required by 2030. And also, we are keen to ensure that National Grid confirm that the inclusion of this project in an accelerated investment programme, and it is within this government and National Grid accelerated investment programme, which means it needs to be delivered by 2030, or pretty much, if it's not 2030, it's soon after, has effectively scoped out an offshore option, because that offshore option is going to take longer to actually determine. And by putting it in the accelerated investment pool of projects, effectively it's scoping out that potential offshore option, and we want confirmation that that isn't the case. So that's the principle in terms of the proposals, and that continues to be our case. We continue, to in that Appendix B draft response to raise strong objections in principle to the proposal, and we still think it is premature, as not all of those potential alternative options have been fully explored and assessed to our satisfaction. And we're aware of many councils on the route and that have raised that same issue and are continuing to do so with National Grid. So notwithstanding that issue in principle, that we still feel that the need and the type of mitigation hasn't been fully explored and justified, we still raise those very serious concerns about this preferred alignment itself. As I've said, the absence of detailed impact assessments, in particular the heritage impact assessments, to identify the significance of those heritage assets, hasn't been made. And also what we need to be really careful of is that the cumulative impact needs to be assessed as well. So it's not just the individual heritage assets, it's where you have a concentration of those, you need to look at the whole impact in combination. Then what we're saying is once that's been done, which we haven't seen yet, then the impact of those proposals can be more fully identified and assessed, and then those suitable mitigation measures can be considered. Undergrounding, pylon design, landscape mitigation, could be heritage compensation, could be a whole host of things that could be put in place, but until you know what the impact is, it's a little bit cart before the horse. And then we've also made the point that particular attention needs to be given to suitable mitigation where there is that concentration of heritage assets. And that's in close proximity to the proposed alignment. And so, for example, one of those is that narrow and sensitive corridor between Great and Little Waltham that we have talked about. There are other instances as well to the west of Writtle. There are other instances where the route goes east of Ingatestone and comes back into Stock and has a particular impact upon a church in that location. So until we can understand what those impacts are, then we will need to know what those impacts are before we can suggest what that suitable mitigation is. So finally, the next steps in relation to this project. As I said before, this is a nationally significant infrastructure project, a development consent order application. We are at that summer, autumn time, non-statutory public consultation. I was on a call today with National Grid, and they are still planning to have their statutory public consultation in 2024. When pushed, they couldn't tell when in 2024. I suppose it will really effectively, it will be how quickly they can assess all of the representations that have been submitted to them and put forward the final statutory development consent order. And then 2025, the order is submitted to the Planning Inspectorate. And then in 2025-26, the examination is undertaken. And they've got a construction period of 4 years, which does seem quite ambitious, but that's what's being reported as it stands. So I hope that has provided members with a summary of what the proposals are through this second consultation and the draft responses. The recommendation is on the front cover of the covering report. And finally, just to note that because we feel that many of the original comments that we made haven't been taken into account, we are resubmitting our first response in addition to the response that's being made specifically to this second consultation. So I think I'll leave it there, Chair, and back to you.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. I imagine, sorry, can you hear me? Very comprehensive. I imagine it must be quite frustrating to repeat almost verbatim what you probably did a year ago. But are there any councillors that would like to raise any concerns or any points? Councillor Jick? Yeah.
Having listened to a presentation on this, it seemed that the offshore was disregarded specifically because of the cost of that. I think because of the unanswered questions, and I'm not sure if it's implied but perhaps not explicit in this, is that once you have done all the mitigation of the issues that would arise going through the area of outstanding natural beauty, etc., that they can't fully cost the onshore against the offshore until they've actually done all of that work. And as I say, I got the impression the biggest driver really was a cost of putting it offshore. So that's just a point I think might be worth making.
Thank you. Is that?
That point is correct. All indications show that an offshore solution could be up to 5 times more expensive. That's the metric that we've been told. However, I think we're in a situation where another part of National Grid is looking at an offshore solution as part of. There are 2 parts, well, there's actually 4 parts of National Grid, but for this purpose, there's 2 parts. There's the application, the distribution company, and they're the company that are effectively putting in the planning application. But then there's also the ESO, the electricity supplying operator, who are actually a separate, completely separate part of National Grid that are looking at the wider impacts and ensuring that electricity is flowing around the grid and demand will be met going forwards in the future. Those 2 things aren't aligned, and you're absolutely right. And that is one of the points that we are making in our consultation response, that until we can understand whether it's possible for this proposal to be included within an offshore solution, it's a bit difficult to start comparing the 2 because, again, that solution needs to be undertaken first and those decisions need to be undertaken first. And that's precisely why we still think these proposals are premature and we want to know why they are needed by 2030. And that's what's in the response.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I just want to elaborate on that point a little bit. Obviously, you know I come from Southwood and Ferrers, and we know that Bradwell is going to happen in one way, shape or form, whether it's a Chinese reactor or it's a lot of modular reactors from Rolls-Royce or something. The site is earmarked as a nuclear site, and we need that generation capability. We also know that Bradwell, they've stated it, needs a new connection to the grid. That's been stated. They have choices. They could take it under the Blackwater, straight across, and actually connect into that Dedham substation. Not a problem for us if they do, providing they got the capacity. And probably would be the shortest route as the crow flies, but they've got to take it under the estuary. However, they could also have to bring a new route from Bradwell through to the interconnect. We know the capacity is for a 2 gigawatt circuit, which will require new pylons. The ones actually going through South Woodham at the moment do not cater for that. So my question is, it comes on to that point you've just raised, Mr. Potter, on the second one, of the strategic side of it. You know, when I heard that little bit's going to jut out in stock, I'm thinking, hey, presto, you know, that will be the route. If they have to connect in, you're going to have another connectivity going north of Hangingfield Reservoir through to bring it out from Bradwell. So I would just like to see us now, based on the fact that this is the second, it's not the statutory consultation, just elaborate a bit more on this central Essex strategy and say, look, you need to get all these in order, otherwise we're going to have more connectivity. We know we need Bradwell. You will not get electric charging in London unless Bradwell comes on board. It's needed at the capacity, and it's needed to be close to London to generate the baseline capacity through the night to actually, you know, service car charging, which is everybody's target. So I'd like to see just a couple more paragraphs or something inserted on this central strategy, just draw it out of them so that when they come to the statutory one next year, we're kind of forcing them to address this a little bit more, because otherwise we're just going to get a link, and then 2 years down the line, guess what, another line's going to be needed to come in, and that's going to cut across the south part of the district. So for the sake of a few paragraphs now to draw this out, I think that might be a good few things to put into this proposal at this stage. Thank you.
I mean, Councillor O'Brien makes some good points there in relation to Bradwell and the future of that potential electricity generating on the previous nuclear site there. I would say that that isn't part of these proposals, and we have asked those questions. It is a completely separate proposal. There's another development consent order that's happening at the moment from Bramford to Twinstead in Braintree, and that's a separate development consent order. I think the wider point is well made, but I'm not sure whether this response is the right place for that. However, I'll leave that for board to decide, because you're absolutely right, it is the second non-statutory consultation. I think if we were at the statutory stage, then it probably would just be ruled out because it's just not part of the proposals at hand. So I'll leave that for the board to deliberate.
Councillor, sorry, who's got their hands up?
Thanks very much. Yeah, thank you for the work that's been done on this, and I think the response is robust, and I'm very grateful for it. As with the first non-statutory consultation, this consultation does feel in many ways like a justification for National Grid's predetermined preference for the onshore routes, as has already been mentioned. We all favour moving towards greener energy, but the proposed route is premature, as you say in the response, and we do need to fully explore an offshore option, which of course is the Conservative Group's preferred option. There's a lack of transparency from National Grid around the strategic options. In the Council's proposed response, I was pleased to see comments around concerns about heritage, both designated and undesignated, as well as landscape impact of the proposed route and design. And I agree that these haven't been fully assessed. And as such, the selection of the draft onshore route is, again, premature. In terms of the amended proposals for the pylon route west of Writtle, as you can imagine, I might be interested in. The detailed heritage assessments are needed to understand significance and setting in what is a deeply historical area, going back to Roman times. Indeed, for hundreds of years, Writtle was a more significant settlement than Chelmsford, so there's a lot of history there. To that end, I'd like to ask if policy boards could please consider including reference to Writtle's neighbourhood development plan, which is not currently mentioned in the response, as that document contains many references about heritage assets, the semi-rural nature of Writtle, and in particular the treasured views around the parish. I think the neighbourhood development plan possibly hasn't been included because, in effect, it is part of Chelmsford's local plan. However, the Writtle document does specifically reflect the views of the local community brought out by several public consultations. And the existence of the neighbourhood plan and its relevant content should, I think, be referred to in the response to ensure National Grid is aware of this document. And so I'd be grateful if colleagues on the committee would support that inclusion. Other than that, I'm happy, as I said, with the robustness of the report and the detail there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thorpe. The neighbourhood plan, as you rightly say, is part of the statutory development plan. Writtle's neighbourhood plan being having that made status, and therefore we have made National Grid aware of the development plan in its entirety. However, I think the points that you make are well made, and it would be I don't think it would cause us any issue with just reinforcing the points that that the neighbourhood plan make in relation to the heritage and landscape issues affecting Writtle.
Councillor Soshin.
Thank you. I want to comment about point 4 to point 2 on your letter, page 5, and the requirement by 2030.
Sorry, Councillor. Yeah, if you. Thank you.
Sorry, bring that a bit closer to me. Now, the offshore route, I think as well as the cost of it, it's the timing of it. It's probably a proposal to take rather longer, and that's why the 2030 number is important, date. Also, I have a friend who is involved in the communications cables that run from the sea, and really how they separate undersea cables from these communication cables has not even really been contemplated. You can't have this huge power line next to one of these communication cables. It would just wouldn't work. You'd have to have really develop something that doesn't quite exist. So there's a question of timing on that route as well as the costs, or maybe that is the part of the huge cost to separate these substantially. But I mean, Officer Jeremy Potter made the point about 2030. We haven't had evidence that is, build this and can it be used at that stage? Is it connected up at either end at that stage? But nevertheless, in our objective to get to zero carbon, I'm just worried about the wholesale delay of this. It is extremely likely at some point we'll need this unless we substantially reduce consumption or have localized production of power, either from local wind farms, local solar panels, or substantial reduction in the requirement for electricity by proper insulation. But this point 4.2 is extremely important to get whether this is really useful to have this by 2030 to achieve our targets on zero carbon, or otherwise, and if it's later, then the other options are perhaps more valid.
Thank you, Councillor Soshin. Would you like to come back, or?
I think most of those points are actually sort of within the consultation response as it stands. The 2030 date is driven primarily by consents of wind farms that are happening in the North Sea, off Suffolk and Norfolk. and National Grid will have a requirement to and contractual arrangements to connect to those. So I think they will be wanting to ensure that they meet their deadlines. And in relation to the technical matters about communication and electricity power, I mean, they would. I've got to say, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm going to not necessarily comment on the technical side of things. But any solution would obviously have to ensure that it doesn't have a detrimental effect to any existing asset underwater.
Councillor Pooley.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm in favour of most of the points that have been raised going into the response in a way that we can trust you to reflect. It's appalling, isn't it, that we have to go back and say, as the top headline of the response, well, actually, you have ignored everything in our initial response. And I'm glad to hear Councillor Thorpe perhaps talking about the Conservatives' preferred response. Unfortunately, the objections to this don't appear to be getting to the government's ears at all. I don't know what our MP thinks about all of this. She made some initial comments saying she didn't think it was such a good idea, but this was planning. We need, if this is going to change at all from some top-down imposition of the intended route by some intended date at some stage, then there's got to be much more trust in the government taking some notice of the consultation which is happening. I feel a little bit like Canute here. If we're all sitting, saying no, 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 please don't come this way, don't do it this way, but you can't stop the tides. And in this sense, the National Grid and the government's ability to divorce itself from any long-term strategic way of looking at what our energy needs actually are is really quite appalling, and I worry about that. Nevertheless, let's try and trust the process and go ahead with this consultation response in the way that you suggest. What do we want from a consultation, whether it's the local plan or whether it's this or anything else? We want to end up with knowing that the points made in the consultation by ourselves and others are taken notice of and acted upon, and where helpful, built into the final solution. That's what we, the council, and more important, the parish council, and more important still, local residents expect from voters, expect from a consultation. So what might we suggest that might help that? Well, A, you're saying please answer, and that would help. But I wonder whether this is sufficiently important to suggest to National Grid that they need to come down to Essex and talk to us, because there are several areas in Essex which are affected by this. I think that the consultation, that a local statement by National Grid, we're coming down to you to talk about it, explain it, would give us the opportunity, and the parish councils the opportunity to face-to-face to listen to some of the responses, and I think would add to the credibility of the long-term answer, because as Councillor Thorpe is saying, it feels still like a top-down imposition. And the fear of it remaining a top-down imposition is getting stronger. Thanks.
I see you scribbling, which makes me think.
Again, the wider points, well made, but we have National Grid obviously go at consultation periods, will have engaged more widely, and there was a meeting at the race consultation event at the racecourse, which I know I attended, and probably quite a few of you may well have attended as well, where there was an opportunity to speak directly to their team. They are in touch with all key officers within the host authorities, and as I said, I was on a call with them today. But I mean, if the board feel that a bit more of a targeted engagement with yourselves would be useful, then we can ask for that.
Thank you. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we've been round the loop on this sufficiently. Is it appropriate to propose an amendment to the recommendation which says that we would include reference to Central Essex generating requirements for the future and specific reference to the Writtle neighbourhood plan?
Is that something that we put to a vote? Is that something that...
It would need a seconder.
Oh, yes. Do we have a seconder? This is my first vote. Do I ask people to vote? Can we vote? Yeah, sure, Councillor Pooley.
I hope that the Waltham's concerns about this have been adequately covered.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think that if we are amending the motion in certain specific respects, which would reflect the tone of the debate today, then we should reflect the specific hopes and requirements of both Little Waltham and Great Waltham in a way which, well, I think we can leave how that's done. It needs to be reinforced. We can either throw our hands up and say, well, it's going to happen anyway, or else we can get increasingly concerned about the way that this is taking shape. And I think we're still in that space at the minute.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I just wanted to say a few words about the request for a heritage assessment. I know many people think that putting it underground, out of sight, out of mind, but it is extremely disruptive putting it underground, and I don't know, to be honest. I'm not qualified enough to say which is a better solution, overground or underground, if you had to choose between the two. And it seems to be the right thing to do, to ask for a proper heritage solution, heritage assessment. Do you know, Jeremy, we can request it, but can they just refuse to do it? That's question number one. And question number two is, you're kind of then saying the decision on whether you go underground or overground is made according to a heritage decision, but there are other disruptions and issues around whether it's overground or underground. So there's a danger of putting it at the mercy of that decision. But what happens if they just refuse to do the heritage and say, no, we've made our decision?
So before we vote, would we be able to answer that question? Thank you.
Absolutely. So in answer to your substantive point, they have to do it. They will, if they submit their development consent order without all of that information that will need to find its way into their environmental statement, they are likely to not get very far in their examination. So they do have to do this. It's just that, unfortunately, because, well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your viewpoint, because we've had this second non-statutory consultation, it's drawn this process out a little bit further than it may have done normally, because members may be well aware on other national significant infrastructure projects, you just have that one non-statutory consultation. So yes, they will have to do it. It's just that I suppose the point is, for us to be able, as I said, it was the kind of cart and horse issue, in the sense that for us to be able to give sensible comments on their proposal, because it's getting quite detailed where the pylons are actually going, the route, but we haven't seen the assessment of whether that is the right place or not. So we will be engaging with them to ensure that the heritage impact assessment is undertaken to the standard that we require. And if it isn't, then we'll be making those points again when at the formal statutory consultation point, and we'll have an objection to an inspector at some point in the future.
I think we're going to put a pin in the vote because we've got lots more questions, which is absolutely fine. But Councillor Massey and then Councillor Sampson.
I was just going to say apologies to the people from the Walthams. I'm happy for my amendment to include the Walthams as well as Writtle and Central Essex generating requirement. Thank you.
Councillor Sampson.
Thank you. Do we know if any of the other areas that this affects outside of Chelmsford have put anything in about the community benefiting from being near the pylons? Because there's obviously lots with regards to wind and other types of energy where saying local communities should benefit, whether it's in the form of cheaper bills or something else. Do we know if anyone else has asked for those sort of things?
That's a really good point. And as part of these kind of nationally significant infrastructure projects, the impact tends to be local, but the benefit is national by their very nature. And because of that, the process does allow local communities to benefit. Ordinarily, it would be things like environmental funds, biodiversity net gain. There'll be a requirement for them to do all of this anyway. There may well be some other opportunities. It's mainly in the form of money and funding for local communities. So yes, that is going to be an opportunity in the future for all of the host authorities to ask for. At this stage, we're still at that point where we're still going through all of this kind of technical matters. So, for example, the Longfield solar farm, there is a fund there that will provide for local community needs, which has been done outside of that kind of normal kind of Section 106 matters. So yes, it's an opportunity that does arise for all authorities to tap into.
Councillor Young.
Thank you. I just wanted a question. If this consultation goes in, at what point do we know whether they've paid any attention to it? Is it when we say the statutory consultation?
So there is a requirement for them to undertake what's called a PEER. Sorry, it's another acronym. So it's a preliminary environmental impact statement. And they are working on this now. And within that document, they will need to take on board all of these impacts that we've been talking about: heritage, environmental impacts, biodiversity, landscape, all of those things, to allow them then to complete the environmental statement that's submitted. So we will start to see, when they engage with officers, some of the requirements that we are asking for through that preliminary environmental impact report. So hopefully we won't get to a situation where they submit, and it wouldn't be in their interest to do that, because they'll be faced with all of the councils across the whole of East Anglia saying that you've ignored us and you haven't provided any of that information. So they certainly will be doing that, so before they submit the actual development consent order.
So can I just have one? Sorry. Because I was just going back to the discussion we had earlier, which was around whether we wanted to call them to sit in front of us. And I just wondered if there was a time frame between sort of them looking at our response and be of the statutory. If we didn't think they'd kind of paid any attention, whether we could say, oh, you know, get in here sort of thing, along with all the other councils that haven't been listened to either.
I think we have a good idea before Christmas. So yeah, you know, officers can advise maybe through the cabinet member if you know, we feel that there hasn't been much progress, then maybe through the cabinet member for a growing Chelmsford, then we can ask for that request as you set out, if that's agreeable to the cabinet member.
Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. I think the report's really good in the way it sets out how we, as a council, strongly object to it. But just the mention of other councils in the area and the East Anglia region, I'd imagine they've all objected as well. Is there a kind of coordinated response as well as the individual councils going back? Just wonder.
Again, really good question, and the answer is yes. We're working with Essex County Council, as well as all the Essex authorities, as well as all of the host authorities in Suffolk and Norfolk. So we're, you know, sharing information and being able to coordinate our responses accordingly. So the answer is yes.
If there aren't any more questions, then we can move on to the vote, which has expanded. Do you have written down what that is, or I can go back to Councillor Massey for the specifics? Would you mind repeating it with the amendment, please?
It's the recommendation with the addition of inclusion of paragraphs to include central Essex generating requirements for the future, the Writtle neighbourhood plan, and the concerns of the residents in Great and Little Waltham.
And Councillor Japes, are you happy to still second?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. So can I have a show of hands for everybody who is for? I don't think I need to count. For the sake of completeness, can I have a show of... Oh, sorry, am I allowed to vote? Oh, sorry, I looked like I was against. I'm a hand up. And can I have a show of hands for those who are against? You're abstaining? Oh. Oh, sorry. There we go. See? Every day is a learning day. Can I have a show of hands for anybody who'd like to abstain? It's like a maths exercise. So, I think that's very clearly carrying forward.
Well, okay, so I'll now just put the complete recommendation with the amendment that we've just agreed. And just to read the recommendation: to approve the consultation response set out in Appendix 1 for submission to the National Grid. This follows agreement with that the Council should submit its response past the advertised 21st of August 2023 consul deadline. And then there's the extra piece that Councillor Massey advised, we just voted on. So that's the entire...
Thank you. It'd be also helpful for Dan for his minutes. Did you capture that? There we go. Are we happy that this conversation or this item has come to a close and we can move on to the next item? Lovely. Do we have that? Do we have a projection?
No, I don't, thank you.
Don't need one. If we could move on to the next item, so consultation on national planning reforms, the implementation of plan making reforms, taking into consideration the question that we had from the public earlier.
Yeah. Thank you. Good evening, members. So this report provides a summary of the government's latest plan making reforms, published for consultation in July, and seeks approval to submit the Council's consultation response, which is attached to Appendix 1 of your covering report. The latest consultation proposes changes to plan-making regulations, national policy and guidance to implement relevant parts of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which is currently making its way through Parliament. The proposed changes are intended to be rolled out on a phased basis to enable a new local plan system to start from around autumn 2024. The government's key driver for planning reform is for simple, speedier plans which clearly show what's planned in an area, which are updated frequently and more digitally accessible and shaped by the communities while they're being drawn up. Section 4 of your covering report summarises the key proposals in the consultation document under the main topics. These comprise proposals which are new, previously promoted proposals set out in earlier reform consultations with more detail, as well as proposals to improve features of the existing system which are not being consistently delivered in the right way. Key proposals to note include confirmation of a 30-month timeframe for plan preparation, or 2.5 years. Typically, plans at the moment take much longer to prepare, on average between 5 and 7 years. This speeded up process is set out in Figure 1 at paragraph 3.3 of your covering report, and will allow around 23 months for plan making processes, 6 months for examination, and then a month to adopt the plan. Prior to this, 30 months formally starting, a 4-month period for early preparation works proposed to enable things like the contents of the plan, the programme and consultation dates to be scoped out. A new key proposal is for the introduction of 3 new gateway assessments to be undertaken during the plan making process, And this is intended to reduce the time spent examining plans and to speed up the process generally. As shown also in Figure 1, the first two would be advisory before statutory public consultation, and a final one would be mandatory, undertaken by a planning inspector to check that the plan is ready to be examined. The government's also proposing setting clearer expectations for plan evidence base, to be more standardised, to be more proportionate, to reflect local principles. And they're also considering things like enabling the freezing of evidence base at certain points in the process, as well as removing things like the justified soundness test, which they say will be looked at further and confirmed in future iterations and consultations on the National Planning Policy Framework. The proposals set out also include a greater emphasis on community engagement, with more time for consultation and engagement and a greater use of digital engagement tools. The requirement we have at the moment to produce a statement of community involvement, that would be removed, and details of how we would consult would be set out in a new project initiation document to be published at the very early engagement stage, and this would also be assessed by a government-appointed examiner at the first gateway. There'll also be new requirements for planning authorities to notify and invite early participation on matters that might shape the direction of the plan before the 30-month timeframe starts, and a new requirement for prescribed bodies, so Natural England, for example, the Environment Agency, Integrated Care Boards, etc., to assist us in plan making throughout the process. A proposed more focused approach to plan monitoring is set out also within the consultation document, including things such as a light touch annual return, together with a more detailed return 4 years after adoption that would then be used to inform the future review of and updates to a plan. And then supplementary planning documents and area action plans, they wouldn't form part or feature in the new planning system, although the consultation confirms that supplementary planning documents could remain in force until authorities adopt a new style local plan. But there would be scope to introduce something called supplementary plans to deal with exceptional or unforeseen circumstances. These would be given the same weight as a local plan following their adoption, but they would also need to be independently examined. The consultation document contains proposals to help ensure a smooth transition from the current to the future plan-making system. And it makes clear that the current system will remain in place and operational for emerging plans that are submitted for examination up until the 30th of June 2025. These dates are, however, subject to royal assent of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, but the government's setting it out now in the consultation to provide local planning authorities with as much notice as possible of this date. It's important to note that the consultation proposes that plans that will become more than 5 years old during the first 30 months of the new system coming into force will continue to be considered up to date for decision-making purposes. So our adopted plan will not suddenly be out of date when the new system commences in autumn 2024. In addition, existing local plans will remain in force until the local planning authority adopt a new style plan. And things like statements of community involvement and our local development scheme, which is a project plan for plan making, would also remain in force where they relate to an old style planning document. In response to the first question posed by Mrs. Birch, it is expected that the local plan review will continue to be prepared under the existing plan-making system and ready for submission before the deadline of the 30th of June 2025. And we do consider this to be the most appropriate approach to ensure that the significant amount of work and evidence-based gathering undertaken so far for the local plan review isn't wasted, and also to ensure that the Council maintains an up-to-date local plan. There are also a number of uncertainties over what the final system will comprise and when it will be rolled out due to delays with progressing the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill through Parliament. And what we plan to do is present a new local development scheme or project plan to this board in November, and that will demonstrate how submission before the 30th of June 2025 is achievable. Appendix 1 of your covering report sets out the 43 consultation questions and a proposed council response where appropriate. Overall, the responses broadly support many of the proposals where they're aimed at ensuring plans are simpler and more accessible, produced more quickly, etc. However, we do raise some concerns in the responses that a number of the proposals we feel will be unrealistic in practice. There's a lack of flexibility as well in terms of the detail that we have at the moment, and they also place a number of additional financial burdens on local planning authorities. In particular, we are concerned about the 30-month plan making process, and that is unrealistic. It also doesn't allow for things like delays in the process, such as delays in receiving information from third parties. Sometimes evidence base is very complex, can take a number of months, if not years, to assemble. There can be delays relating to national and local elections, changes in political leadership, etc. And we feel that the 30-month programme, as currently set out within the consultation, doesn't allow for those variables. Once approved, the consultation response will be submitted to the government by the closing date, which is the 18th of October. And the government will then analyse all the responses and use them to inform their proposed plan-making reforms going forward. Just in response to Mrs. Birch's second question, Chapter 14 of the consultation document states that arrangements for neighbourhood plans under the new system will be set out in due course. They're not included within this current consultation. We anticipate that these arrangements will form part of a future consultation, and we would like to report those to a future meeting of this board. In the interim, the spatial planning team will also keep neighbourhood planning groups updated through its neighbourhood plan lead officer. But in the absence of details at the moment, we would still recommend that neighbourhood planning groups continue to plan and press on with their plan making for now. So in conclusion, Chair, this is another consultation on detailed changes to national planning policy arising from the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, due to come into force from autumn 2024. They do affect the current planning system, they do not affect the current planning system under which the local plan review will continue to be prepared and examined. But the proposed changes are likely to have a real significant impact on the preparation of plans in the future. So it is important that we respond to this and future plan reform consultations to set out our views on the proposals, which will impact future iterations of the Chelmsford local plan. Thank you, Chair. I now move you to consider the recommendation on page 1 of your covering report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have any points that would... Councillor Soshan.
I refer to 3.14 in the report, and it refers to a number of public bodies that would be consulted, and it mentions county councils, environment agents, Natural England, the Sport England, and what it doesn't mention Historic England or Heritage England. I don't know what the correct titles for such bodies are, or town and parish councils. For that matter, it doesn't mention water and sewage companies. Now, although it says they could be anybody, I'd feel that happier if some of those were actually specifically mentioned, and I don't know if we could write to that effect. The other point that was mentioned both by the person who addressed us earlier, the lady, I think probably a parish councillor or working on a neighbourhood plan, that the neighbourhood plan that is most unsatisfactory to come to this stage and just said they haven't bothered to address neighbourhood plans, which are very important, and a load of people work very hard on neighbourhood plans and then leave them all up in the air as to whether they will be ignored. I just remember the last time there was a change from design guides that, say in Great Barrow, we spent a lot of effort on, and they were then effectively ditched. So I find that unsatisfactory. I don't know if we could comment that. And I don't know whether you can have a covering note to your question responses that will cover those kind of things.
Thank you for your questions. Yeah, just taking the second point, as I say, the consultation doesn't specifically address the impact for neighbourhood plan preparation at this stage, but they are anticipating on setting that out in future consultations. We can put something in a response, happy to do that if the board would like us to urge that to happen as soon as possible, to give certainty for neighbourhood plan groups, particularly as we know that there are a number of active groups at the moment in Chelmsford, and providing that certainty as soon as possible we think would be helpful. Happy to do that. In terms of the prescribed bodies, the list is much longer and generally reflects those organisations that we need to consult with at the moment, so the statutory bodies, so it does include heritage organisations as well. And we already always consult with neighbourhood groups, planning, parish councils, local planning authorities, etc. And we do actually pick up within the consultation response that we feel the list should be widened as well to encompass other organisations and stakeholders that offer real value when we're plan making in terms of providing comments and feedback.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Yes, I'd just like to again support what's just been said on neighbourhood plans, and also to reaffirm that to make this clear. It's not just new neighbourhood plans that are still being made by certain parishes, it's those that have already made their plans, especially if you've got a 30-month window to force materialistic changes, which will then force us to make major consultations to changes to a neighbourhood plan, which then forces it to go to inspection and forces it to go back through referendum. That timeline is tight if we're trying to keep in sync with the city council's local plans. So I think we really do need to make this clear that if you've only got 30 months and you will probably make changes to the local plan that may have material or major modifications to a neighbourhood plan, we need to be sure that that timeline is recognised, because town councils and parish haven't got the budgets, because I know how much the one in South Woodham cost, and to push these through if they're going to contradict. Because what happens if they do contradict? Guess what? Your one takes precedence. So that will just not go down well with residents in all parishes. So we really need to emphasise that the cohesion between local and neighbourhood plans for plans that are already made needs to be, addressed sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Sorry, could I, just before you go back, did you say that in the consultation response you do refer to that, or it's not referred to yet and you'd be strengthening it?
We don't have anything at the moment specifically on the arrangement for neighbourhood plans within our consultation response, but I'm happy if the board would like me to strengthen that by adding a reference to say that we would welcome clarity, certainty about the impact on neighbourhood plan making under the new system as soon as possible, not just for those neighbourhood plan groups that are perhaps working on emerging plans, but also those which have made plans but might be looking at revising those as well. Because there isn't anything at the moment that even indicates that the 30 months would apply to neighbourhood plan groups and neighbourhood planning. So, yeah, we can certainly add that in if that's helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Pooley.
Thank you. Yes, I'm encouraged to hear that we're still confident that our revised or reassessed local plan will be in place following the existing preparation and timeline. And I think I'm right in saying, actually, that in many ways, by having gone to the public already with the not the preferred options document, but the possible issues and options document, what we've already done, in effect, is consult all of the people that would need to be consulted under the new process. So in many ways, in principle, we are already following this, but we're defining the timeline rather differently. And in terms of the evidence base, that's also true. And all we need to focus on, in one sense, is the transition from the new arrangements, from our existing arrangements to the new arrangements, which sound reasonably straightforward, but need things like reference to the local plan. Maybe you're spotting some other areas where, looking to the future, you can't see a way in which transition would then be possible once we have adopted the revised local plan, although it's gone to inspectorate in June 2025. So I think, I mean, I'm confident, if you're confident, of course, but I think that we can be confident that the arrangements about public consultation, which at first reading sound rather compressed, actually our existing operation allows more opportunities, which we continue to need to explain to the public what they are. But if there are other things that we believe would assist the consultation process, then we should say so. And I'm interested in another sentence or two about whether we think the proposed new arrangements are positive or negative in terms of public awareness and consultation, because we will be looking at those next time around, not this time around, but next time around.
Thank you.
Well, under the existing system at the moment, there's 2 statutory stages, and under the new system, they're also proposing to retain those 2 statutory stages, together with an early engagement stage before the 30-month clock starts ticking. And that would be on things like the vision, the scope of the plan, the key principles, key priorities, etc., which is similar to what we do now. Under the consultation at the moment, what the government are keen to explore is the use of digital tools as much as possible and technology to make plans more accessible, more interactive, to make it easier for people to get engaged and to make comments. So some of those proposals we hope would bring benefits to enable them to be more accessible and reach a broader audience. So in terms of the nature of the consultation, the key stages are very similar, but they're looking to make some of it more interactive and more engaging and more accessible to reach a broader target audience.
Yeah, if I'm really pleased that that's what we're trying to do anyway. I mean, that's precisely what we've done in the last time around and will do next time around, and all ideas are welcome.
And within our consultation response, sorry Chair, we have actually given some examples of where we as an authority embrace those digital tools as well and try to make it more accessible for people to engage and to find out and participate. So we've referred to things that we did most recently for the issues and options consultation, so things like the online video that we produced, and we also always have a standard representation form, for instance, for people to make their comments as well. So things like that, which are being mentioned within the consultation, we already do as an authority, and we're making those points back to government.
Thank you.
Shall I just make the recommendation now? The recommendation...
Councillor Fuller.
If I may, can I just make the point that we should be very fortunate in the quality of the work that is being done by our officers, and that work has been done over a number of years now. There are authorities that don't have a local plan. You know, there is one neighbouring us that hasn't had a local plan for 20 years. But we, because of the work of our officers, we have had local plans consistently of good quality, and that has served us well and will serve us well now in this period up to the introduction of whatever the government comes up with. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. I feel like asking for a round of applause, but we might embarrass our officers. So
Chair, I'll just make the recommendation now.
Sure, Councillor
That the
Social.
board note the report and approves the proposed consultation responses set out in Appendix 1, and then the little piece about neighbourhood plans that been spelt out earlier.
I've had
So
practice.
that's the recommendation.
Thank you. I've had practice from the first item. If I could ask for a second. Or do I not need to do that? I do. Yes, thank you. Councillor Pooley. Yeah. All agreed? Is there anybody that disagrees? Oh, you can assume mine's a hand. Is there anybody that's disagreed? Or anybody that's abstaining? There we go. I'll get better. Thank you very much. I think that draws this item to a close. Thank you for pulling that together and for presenting it to us today. That concludes the planned items on the agenda. Are there any urgent business matters? No? I've had a very brief conversation with Dan before the meeting to ask if, well, not ask if, he has agreed for the forward plan to be included on the agenda for the future meetings, so that we can have a look at a better forward view at what's coming up. Anything to add? No? Thank you very much for joining once again, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of months. Thank you. Bye-bye.